Okay, then I talk about field research, listener observation. That's this class. Ethnographies. Okay. How about morality of research? Okay, well, this is warming up. Let me just do reminders. Name tags out. That's great. I really appreciate that. Very helpful. I'm going to see by the end of the day if we can get back to the regular schedule of having another quiz this coming Thursday. The other part of it is I need to let people, how many people here still need to do a makeup? So the last possible time to do that is today, during office hours. I'll let class go a little early, about 5 minutes early, about 9:10, but I can't waste any more time than that. So for those people who need to do it, you'll have 20 minutes to get it done. Otherwise, you'll have to come by during office hours because today is the last possible time to get it done. Okay, is that clear to everybody? Quiz number 2, makeup. Last possible time today. Okay? So this, let me see how far I get in this lecture material. If I can get at least into the stuff on religion today, then I think I can do the quiz. It's going to be tight, so I'm not sure. Let's see how we do. All right, we've also got a written assignment that you should be at least thinking about working on. We're getting to the end of September. It is due in a couple of weeks, mid-October. So now you really should be seriously thinking about doing it. I went over it in class. The prompt has been on Blackboard since the beginning. So you can always take a look at that. I strongly encourage you to come talk to me after class about topics. Get a rough draft of it done as quick as you can and let me take a look at it so you can get the points you really need. And then finally, if you did poorly on both quizzes and studied like crazy, and you need to come talk to me. I can help, but I can't help if you don't talk to me. So again, office hours is the best time to do that. All right, any questions about any of that stuff? Nope. Yes?
We didn't get the sedge.
It's going around.
I think.
Okay, well, it's in with that class. If you come in after the roll sheet has gone around,
No,
then...
just didn't even come to this side.
Oh, it didn't come to that side? Okay, in that case, go ahead and bring it. Sorry. All right. Okay, let's just start off through this.
I think it's starting on this side this time.
All right, so let's review what we talked about last time. I'm just going to go through this stuff real quickly so you know what are the main points that will be on the next quiz. Causation versus correlation. You need to know the difference between those two. Correlation, general, vague association. Causation, very specific, you know the ingredients. In an experiment, researcher controls all variables, make one change at a time and measures the impact. By looking at the impact of the, well, excuse me, back up. In an experiment, the researcher controls all variables, makes a change in the independent variable, and measures the impact in the dependent variable by comparing the control to the experimental group. At the end of that process, then you do a test for scientific effectiveness. Test of reliability versus validity. If you're going to run a test of reliability, what should you do?
Make sure it's repeatable.
Pardden?
Make sure it's repeatable.
I can't hear.
Make sure it's repeatable.
Yep. Do it over again. Do it over again. A test of validity says what?
Can we trust the data?
You really measured what you intended. And the best example of that, which I used in class, is the UCR. Highly reliable in its measure of rate. Is it a valid measure of rate? No. Okay. Strengths and weaknesses of experiments. It is the gold standard of science. Nothing is better than that. However, in the real world, particularly in a discipline like sociology, it's both morally difficult and expensive to do experiments, and as a consequence, we use other methods like a survey. In a survey, you carefully construct questions so as not to bias the response. You then administer those questions to a group. The group you're interested in is always called the population. If that survey contacts every member of your population, it's called a what? Census. Good. Mostly we choose a sample, which is a small group of people from that population, so that we can administer it more cost effectively with the same, if not even better, validity. That sample usually is chosen in what manner? Random. Oh, and going back to the experimental method, how do you make sure your control group is identical to experimental group except they are not exposed to the independent variable? Random. Okay. Then we talk about field research, ethnography, participant observations. Those terms are all used interchangeably. So if I throw one or the other of those three in a quiz at you, you should know what I'm talking about. It's the same stuff. It's basically going and looking, and then carefully writing about what you see. It's a method commonly associated with cultural anthropology. You're going out into Samoa, spending time, as Margaret Mead did, looking at the lifestyle of the Samoans, careful writing down field notes. You do the same thing, but not in some exotic, faraway country. You do it in our own. You join a motorcycle gang. You go out and you hang out in a male bathroom and look about what's going on in terms of the casual sexual liaisons going on. These are famous true stories and studies done in sociology. This stuff is rich in human detail, fascinating to read, but is always questionable in terms of scientific rigor. Reliability. Hard to repeat it. An awful lot of this depends on how well the person writes, because it's like, in many cases, reading a novel. But novels depend on the writing ability. That's not science. Moreover, validity. You've joined one motorcycle gang. You got into one bathroom. You got into one poor part of town. Is that really what other groups in other parts of society are like? All right. And then morality research. I'm going to use that to make the transition to our next unit. Anything I just covered, anybody need repeated again? Real quickly, I've done quick, I've gone over this. Remember, the logic of this, I get asked this a lot. You know, you had us read this stuff before, and now you're just testing us again on it. That's true. And you're going to get tested a third time. What we know in education is that repetition breeds knowledge. I'm asking you to read it through the first time. I'm testing to make sure you've read it through before I lecture. I'm not going to test extensively on it, and I try and make sure those test questions are pretty low level. But then I go through and I do a lecture. Now you've had the book, you've had my lecture. Now I'm going to hit you with an awful lot more specific questions around the stuff like I just focused on. And then finally, well, not finally, because that's on the final, but in the midterm, you're going to get the same stuff over again, and then in the final again, over and over and over again. Hopefully in different ways, different questions asked on the same material, so that you are pushed a little bit in your knowledge. So that's the logic of what's going on. But it means it's real important that you get it now. If you're not understanding something, please ask, because it builds on itself, and it will continue to reoccur. And if you got something wrong and don't understand it, let me help. No? Okay, yeah. All right, all right. Well, let's talk about morality in research. As you've seen in that implication, when I talked about the difficulty of doing experiments in sociology, even if we can get stuff into the laboratory, it's immoral. I talked about the gun experiment. I'd love to do, right? I really love to do that one. I really would. We don't know, really. What I've told you about guns and its connection to murder rates in the United States or suicide rates, that is just what? Causation or correlation?
Correlation.
It's just correlation. Can you always raise questions about information you get by way of correlation?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. If I could do an experiment, though, like every other room, knock on the door, give the guy a gun, come back 2 years later, compare the murder rates that were selected at random, those dorm rooms selected at random, I would love to do that. But obviously it's important. And that is almost inevitable in sociology. And even in some areas in psychology, famous study. How many people here have taken psychology already? All right. Social psychology. Famous study, probably the most famous single study in social psychology. Here's the hint. Psst. People psych, you know what I'm talking about?
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly. Milgram. What an incredible study. Very bright. Stanley Milgram, a psychologist, social psychologist, that borderline between sociology and psychology, at Yale University many years ago, back in the early 1960s, becomes overwhelmed with the knowledge of the Holocaust, the butchery of 6 million. And he wants to know why, as the world wanted to know. What we know is that most of the Nazis who designed that horrific process committed suicide, but a few survived. Some later on were caught and tried in the state of Israel. One of the famous cases was a guy named Adolf Eichmann, about third in charge in places like Auschwitz, and he personally was responsible for the death of hundreds of thousands of people. And his defense, when he was placed in the docket and tried, anybody know what he said?
Just following orders.
I was only following orders. And this has become known as being a good German. A good German is somebody who follows orders, no matter what they are. If he had been ordered to plant daisies in Bavaria, Bavaria would have been covered by daisies. But he was ordered to plant Jews, and so Bavaria was covered in the ashes of Jews. How come? Could it happen here? Stanley Milgram asked himself that question. And so, into a laboratory, people are invited to participate in an experiment. And they are told it's an experiment in learning. They're brought in groups of 2 and told they are going to play one of 2 roles, teacher or student. The teacher is going to administer a set of nonsense syllables to the student. The student will attempt to memorize and learn them. The teacher will aid the student in memorizing those by giving him a test. But each time he gets a question wrong, the teacher has got to inflict a shock. And there's an electric shock board. And it starts off very small. 2 volts, 4 volts, 6 volts, 10 volts, 50 volts, 150 volts, 400 volts, XXX. They select these people at random. One guy, they're going to put him in an isolation room where he's strapped down with an electrode on him. He's an older guy, overweight. And as they're strapping him down, he's getting a little nervous about this. This is the guy who's playing the role of student. And he says, whoa, I was at the VA hospital here last week, and they told me I have a heart condition. Are these shocks